And so for this first intentionally left blank live gig, you're going to see us kind of laughing and snickering. And the reason why, if anybody has been a parent or been around little kids, you know when they turn 4.5 years old and that first time they mention the 5th birthday that's coming up in 6 months. And you know every dinner is going to focus around that, every conversation. They wander into your room at 3 p.m. and say, hey, where are my socks? And can I have rabbits at my 5th birthday? And that kind of, well, if you dial back, 6-7 years ago, Lilo and I sitting in the state offices on the Google team, this is the kind of stuff that we procrastinated on, stuff that we didn't want to work on to talk about. And it was really trying to vision what a new system of IT could be. How do you bring fresh eyes into government? What if we got a magic wand to reconfigure how government works, what would it look like? And when the new administration came in and people like Kelly, people like Governor Polis, with this new vision and this new energy and all that experience came in, Kelly turned our dreams into a reality. And so it's been really fascinating to see what he's built with the Colorado Digital Service, and I'm excited to hear more about where it's going. And I know Lilo's been working with him too on a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Brandon said, I mean, this is those times when, like Brandon was saying, we would be like totally burned out on doing something moderately relative to state work, and just be like, what'd be really cool is if we had like an 18F kind of situation here at the state level. Like if we just did something like that, where we just brought a bunch of like tech specialists coming in and like really solving stuff like quick and dirty, and then like posting those kinds of scenarios out there for people to then learn from and pick up later. Those were we had lots of pipe dreams around that stuff, which was super cool. And then and then fast forward a number of years to 2020, and suddenly we're all very violently thrown into some crazy situation, and the digital services team for Colorado came in and really kind of brought that same level of thinking and excitement to COVID relief. So it's been truly incredible, and just tons of fun to watch and tons of fun to work with Kelly and his team on doing really amazing stuff very, very rapidly and like timeframes that I had never seen at state level government. So really excited for this conversation for sure. So,
well, with that, Lilo and I'll just shut up and we'll introduce and throw it over to Kelly, who's on. So Kelly, I guess the first thing is just tell us a little bit, obviously, about your role, but I think I'd also be really interested in kind of how the CDS, the Colorado Digital Service, came about and what you've been able to build.
Yeah, hey everybody, and it was awesome. Brandon sent me this thing from like 2018 that was basically every single thing that we're trying to do. I didn't even understand how a bill became a law in 2018, anyway, so there's like this digital service, kind of movement happening across the country, this civic tech revitalization, right? And it's cool because, some of these concepts that have been baking for a while are starting to become like formalized, and there's books that are being published that people are talking about, and everybody's writing about the work, and like, you're seeing these kind of manifestations of these ideas popping up everywhere, which is awesome. Like it's, we always say like government is us, all of us, it's awesome that everyone can contribute different ways, and together we all kind of move forward as a society. So that's so interesting. The Colorado Digital Service, as Brandon and Lilo said, it's very much like about timing. So I was working away, in the private sector, building APIs, working on stuff like that, and our company got acquired, and I had a 2-year kind of acquisition period. At the end of that, like we were a small team. We all knew we were going to leave and go do stuff. And I had read The Innovative State by Anish Chopra, and I was doing some tinkering with open data and stuff like that, and ended up talking to a few folks at HHS about what they were doing, and this amazing woman, Susanna Fox, told me about the U.S. Digital Service. So, fell in love with the idea immediately, went to DC, the whole family and I, and had this like wonderful, year of living there. And And when we came back to Denver, we started talking about doing this here in Colorado. And I met Matthew McAllister, who had spent 5 years under President Obama, who was also back, now he grew up in Colorado, was back working for the city of Denver on smart city stuff. And so we paired up and started talking with a bunch of folks about this. And, timing is everything, right? So Polis got elected, I knew him from Techstars and he was like, yeah, let's do it. But that was kind of the easy part, right? The hard part was, navigating the mechanics of government and getting funding and stuff like that. So we ended up, we had like 50 meetings with different legislators and all this stuff, and took months and months. And we ended up getting emergency funding, believe it or not. So the same type of funding that goes into like a building collapses and it's not in the budget to fix the building. So what do you do? And the argument from the Polis team and so on was, hey, some of these enterprise IT projects are in such bad shape that this does constitute an emergency because people are ultimately being hurt by this stuff. And so that was enough to get that first like $1 million for the 7-person team. And now we've kind of moved over in year 2 into a different funding structure where we're more like spread across the government. It's called Common Policy, if you know the Colorado government. And so as we got started, it was really interesting because we pitched the idea of, talent kind of rolling in from the private sector. And our thinking has evolved on that too over the little while. But the idea was, hey, there's a bunch of people, especially in Boulder, Denver, that are, you give them a way to plug into government and they will. Like it's not that they don't want to come work in government, they do. They just don't quite have the familiar interface to come start working in government. And the digital service will give us that for a little bit. And then you can use the digital service to work on projects that don't quite fit the typical mold, right? So we got up and going and we were like, what are we going to work on? There's all these things we were really interested in working on and we didn't have any relationships. And, we started working on a couple of things. And then of course, along comes COVID. And so that changed everything for us because most of the team has been dedicated to, contact tracing. We built a symptom tracker with a few folks on this call, like Travis and Lilo and Brandon, and we built exposure notifications with some of the Google folks and Apple folks. And so, worked a lot of vaccine stuff and discovery. And so that's kind of been the journey for us over the last year, has been digging real deep into the COVID stuff. And now the team seems like stable. And it's a tour service model. So in the fall, I'll roll off the team because my 2 years will be up. It's kind of flown by. And our team is already starting to kind of to turn. So the next version of the team is coming in. And hopefully we see team members kind of go on to other roles in the government. That's really my super secret goal, is they really understand and have fallen in love with delivering government services and will now continue on and help in other ways.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, we've definitely shared some quite a number of meetings early on in 2020, trying to get contact tracing up and running, and lots of fun chats going back and forth with lots of different people. So now that now that a lot of that stuff is kind of stabilized, I don't want to say behind us because it's not exactly behind us. What are you and the other CDS folks working on right now that's new or innovative or something that's worth talking about?
Well, one of the most interesting things has been exposure notifications. You guys are probably familiar. In Colorado here, you can go to addyourphone.com and check it out. But it's one of the weirdest things I've ever worked on in my entire career. There was having a meeting yesterday with the team, and it's like an engineer from Google, a volunteer from the US Digital Response, an engineer from the US Digital Service, folks from the Public Health Department here in Colorado, CDPHE, and a few folks from our team. That's the normal team. It's this ragtag group of people that have gotten together, and there's 2.5 million Coloradans have activated it. We've sent over 25,000. We've had 25,000 people use the service to say that they've tested positive, which then goes, kind of spider webs out to, hundreds of thousands of exposure notifications sent. And that thing it's actually been a really good example of a digital service project because, think back a year ago when COVID was hitting and it was like, hey, what's going on in South Korea? Like, oh, they're using GPS to track whatever. And like, that's how they're stopping the spread. And there was like all these global examples and there was like apps coming out and MIT and the Linux Foundation for Public Health and folks like that were starting to talk about like, okay, these are like the cryptography used in these apps and like all that stuff was happening. Right. And so the state is like, should we do something like this? Should we build an app? Like, look at what Utah is doing. All that was going on. And the digital service is a good team for something like this because we were like, hey, we're going to grab a couple of these open source projects that are out there, like MIT SafePath and others, and we'll prototype with this stuff. We'll learn all about it. We'll plug into all these conversations. So none of like these, like the enterprise app teams from like public health agency and others will need to be bothered with this stuff. Like they have a ton going on, they need to execute, but we'll sit over here and work on this thing for a little bit and figure it out. And then as it got to a point where Google and Apple started collaborating together and they first launched the exposure notification API, which many of you probably saw, and that quite wasn't enough for us yet. We're like, do we still really like want to build an app? And this is where having people that have done this stuff before joining the government's important. So folks on our team are like, yeah, it's not about building the app. It's about, the adoption and all these things. Like, this is very hard and expensive to drive adoption. Like we can build this thing, no problem. And no one's going to use it. And then Google and Apple came out with Exposure Notification Express, which is a hilarious name for, it's like name generator, 101. But anyway, that thing was awesome because now Google and Apple says to all the public health authorities like the state of Colorado, all you have to do is provide us with configuration. We will do the rest. And most importantly, we are going to send OS level push notifications to people saying like, hey, you should activate this. And so we knew when we heard that sentence that the adoption was no longer going to be a problem, that we would give them configuration and then we would build a bunch of stuff that wrapped around it, like metrics and the website and other content and various things. And that was a path forward. So that ended up being the way to go. And then we were able to get a budget through the CARES Act for like $1 million budget for marketing. So like a marketing firm that went and like drove adoption, like the billboards and all that stuff. So that's kind of an example of like a really weird, like unique product or project for a digital service. And Lilo, there's a handful of other things I can talk about too that are like not like that. They're more about improving government from the inside. If you'd like some of those stories, happy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe like one or two of those stories too, because I think like kind of drilling into the air quotes workaday work stuff that you guys are doing with agencies would also be super cool, especially for this group, kind of because we're all like in this wild innovation space, right, where it's like we're all trying to grab from each other in a caring way, ways to make things better for our own little groups and agencies. So yeah, anything that you're working on currently too outside of exposure notifications would be cool to hear about.
Yeah, for sure. So I dropped that link to the case study there, and that's fun because it looks like a case study, so it seems very legit. I was happy when I saw that. I was like, okay, this is cool. This looks like something that I'd read like in college, But inside that case study, there's a cool lesson and something that we're seeing kind of all over the place, and that is that UX and procurement are kind of these long lost BFFs, and that is like a fundamental change that we're seeing in government that like everyone in calls like this can help impact. So with contact tracing, things were, the state needed to build a contact tracing system for all 53 local public health agencies to use. There was research that had gone into this. There was a bunch of vendor demos. So it's like, okay, we've had 10 vendor demos. We have a spreadsheet of all the boxes that the different demos have checked. So which one does everyone agree on? Right. And so we came in they had to make a decision in one day. They were about to sign these deals. And we were like, hey, you know what? Like, this is a super scary way to do this stuff, and trust us to take this and run a procurement. Just give us like 2 weeks. we'll do this thing called a bake off that I did this when I was with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid at US Digital Service. So I had a little bit of experience with this stuff, and our procurement lead on our team, like she knew how to run this stuff as well. She'd done it with the city of Denver. So we're like, just give us 2 weeks. And we put out information to vendors saying like, hey, stand up a sandbox for us. We want to build, send us your API docs. Like we want to hit your APIs with sample data. Like we want to understand it because all this stuff like has to stitch together, right? And then meanwhile, our UX lead so a couple of vendors replied, gave us sandboxes, and our UX lead led like 40 user interviews over a 2-week period. Like it was like day and night. She was crushed by this and that. But we were having like people in the counties trying to do stuff that they are going to need to do with the product. And I mean, like, as you would imagine, like a million things come out of this, right? From, hey, we tried to make that API call and your docs are super outdated. Like, that's weird. Who else is using this API? Oh, well, you guys will be the first or whatever. We can customize it however you need. To like, hey, this is how the caseworkers are doing it. Is this possible? And the vendor being like, yep, we got your feedback and we already updated that. So when you do user interviews tomorrow, you can see if it makes a difference. Like, so in that 2 weeks, we really understood like how to work, like how it was going to be working together too. So anyway, that's an example of like, maybe not the coolest thing ever, but something that I find really exciting. And it also connects to like some of this other work that we've started, but it's not really scaling yet. But I think that this is like the next chapter for how all these things stitch together, and that's agile procurement or agile budgeting. So 18F has this fund called 10X, where 18F mostly works with federal agencies. They're based out of GSA, but they work with states through this 10X fund. And so they came and worked with Colorado, and we had them do this agile budgeting workshop where a bunch of legislators attended and different execs and stuff in the different agencies. And it's awesome because they talk about like, how things should be funded. And when teams are handed huge buckets of money, it ratchets it up the pressure and like causes all these weird behaviors by people. Like, so what product people like me want is a smaller budget that's smoothed out, so you can continuously iterate and build that way. And the pressure's like different, you can show this progress. And that really landed with everybody. Of course, because like, I think all of us, that's like common sense, but like, how does that actually, translate in the budget process? So like that stuff is seeded, which I'm excited about. And the last quick thing I'll mention is, one of the things that I got a chance to work on at CMS, and others of you have probably done the same, is bug bounties, and the state has some experience with that stuff, but we were able to get a grant from SIPA to run first bug bounty. So like, we're going to do that at some point in the summer. And that's another one where it's like, it's a type of thing you feel like once you can run it, you like run the play, create the playbook. It's cool because then you can just say, hey, other agencies, like, here's like the couple of steps you can do. And you've kind of like hacked through the bureaucracy, to get to the point where you have this thing that people can use. So that's like the exposure notification stuff is like one interesting way to apply digital service. But the other way is this type of stuff where the digital service, because it's cross-functional by nature, it's like a procurement person, an engineer, and a UX designer and a product manager are like working together with like a policy wonk to try to figure something out with the agency. And from that should come these things that are like super reusable, not just code, but like process and other things.
That's incredible. I have about 50 questions that come to mind, but I'll start simply because I think kind of what Dan had dropped into the chat when he was asking about lessons learned applying to new digital services going forward. I think there are a couple of things that you mentioned right there that I think I'd like to kind of extrapolate on, because I'm curious about as someone coming from the outside into government and seeing the state of government employees right now, where we have traditional IT that has attempted to do these kinds of projects and largely not done them well. Working with the departments, working with the policy people, using user experience, what kind of lessons, if you get to step back, what kind of lessons have you drawn and recommend to government who is traditional IT trying to make this kind of change? What small changes can they make to introduce innovation teams, digital tiger teams, that kind of concept? How do you incentivize people from the outside to come in and do those kind of couple of year tours? Really just peering over the horizon. What kind of lessons have you learned in your experience that you can help? Most of the audience here is, either traditional IT or kind of in an innovation team in their organizations, and, has limited budgets. I'm super curious about the emergency funding. But how can we start to do those green shoots?
Yeah, and the ARP funding, Brandon, like that's, it's going to be incredible to see what happens over the next couple of years from that funding. I think it goes through December 24, and that's a huge deal for all of us, of course. So kind of two things there I heard, and I'm going to start with the second one, the talent. Building a robust, diverse talent pipeline has been like the easiest thing that we've done so far, and same at the U.S. Digital Service. I don't know if you guys saw like the whole Rachel Maddow, come join the U.S. Digital Service embedded in the code on a Build Back Better website, but like that drove like tens of thousands of applications to the U.S. Digital Service. People in general, I feel like, want to come and work in government. Like it's so interesting. So again, like giving them the interface. So there's been a bunch of interesting things happening in Colorado, like around COVID. Many of us interacted with the citizen software engineers. Like that was a super cool thing that popped up kind of out of nowhere, and a bunch of people wanting to help. Like there's Code for America, there's the U.S. Digital Response, right? And then there's like people like Brandon in county government, and just awesome people everywhere, right? So like, I feel like something has happened with that tipping point. When I talk to the people in the Colorado government about this stuff, the conversation is always about attracting talent. How can we get like amazing people to come in government? And my response to that every time and every way I hear it is, that is not the problem. The problem is catching talent. And this goes back to how everything is funded, right? So when the state gets a bucket of money for millions of dollars and says, here's millions of dollars, spend this by, in the next 18 months, the state can't bring on full-time employees. So when I have a pipeline of 1,000 engineers that are like, hi, I'm working at like some amazing tech company and I'm super smart and like want to give back to the place I live, can I come and work in government for a while? The answer is like, no. Or you can come in as a contractor for 9 months through like a third party, right? It's broken. And then when they come in as a contractor, like the agency's like, cool, we see, people like you all the time, and we know you're here for a limited time. So like, there's going to be no trust here, and we're not going to build great teams. So catching talent is like the next chapter for governments to get that stuff dialed in, like better position descriptions, different salary bands. Don't pay a senior UX designer $41,000 a year and call them whatever. Like it's that stuff. And like all that's in motion, to make that better. And you see a lot of that work at the federal level, where the U.S. Digital Service has been very involved in this actually, where it's like, how can we have job titles like data scientist at the federal level? So if you're looking for inspiration, lots of good stuff kind of that direction.
Have you, just on that a little bit, one of the things Lilo and I had done, we ran a design sprint with Galvanize, which is one of the tech co-work centers in Denver. We had several hundred participants. I think the thing that we failed in was to build a network after that event was done. But are there efforts to start to grow some kind of talent pool? Because what you referred to in the third party consultant fee, we always thought that some kind of Craigslist for small time developers to bring in on small innovation projects and stuff like that was something we were just missing in state government. Are there efforts to kind of make that more fluid and flexible?
Yeah, so we're seeing a couple interesting things happen. One, I mentioned like the U.S. Digital Response, right? So how do you plug in like this incredible like volunteer core? Like U.S. Digital Response, there's like, I just talked to them yesterday, there's 6,000 people that have signed up. And these are like very technical people, right? And people that really get it. and 700 of their volunteers have been deployed across like 30 states. And like, we're an example of that. Like we've worked with multiple UX designers and engineers. So that's one. It's like, how do you interface the volunteer core? And that connects, Brandon, to things like the more we're open sourcing various things, the more people can plug in, because having an engineer come in and get access to state systems is a massive, like it's too big of a burden to scale, right? It's a huge headache. So anyway, like that's like one piece of the puzzle. I think that I don't know if that answers it. Keep going.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. Because I think one of the really encouraging things we saw when we were starting to work with citizen developers, people that wanted to contribute time on real problems, we could find that kind of talent that could come in on short-term basis from the outside. We just didn't have anything formal. One of the other things that was exciting was in doing those kinds of design sprints, working with the departments on the program side. We found tech talent resting inside of staff at the programs that were outside of that IT cone. What's been your experience with that kind of shadow IT or program side, staff developers that are, usually hidden in either communications or business intelligence? Is that an untapped resource, or is there any effort to kind of formalize that shadow IT and bring them into kind of the digital service sphere?
Well, one shift that we're seeing that I really am a fan of is moving like product management into the agencies, right? So with our model in the state with a centralized OIT, we talk, like I talk a lot about that AWS phrase, undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? So like when you centralize IT, like it's super cheap to get laptops and phones. It's super cheap to get cloud infrastructure because of like these economies of scale, right? But then when you start talking about like app development, things get a little bit slightly off, because now it's like, ooh, all right, like we really want to move like the delivery team that's building that digital service for the resident needs to be close to the resident, right? There's lots of amazing things that OIT does to scale everything, but the agency delivering that program needs to be super close, right? And so that means like the product management skill set function on the team needs to move into the agency. And in my experience, I'm sure we've all had like diverse experiences, but in my experience, like product management from the vendor too is like not always the best. Like I've definitely seen it work, but the agency having the product lead is, I feel like, the best case scenario. So like that is happening. So you're seeing agencies, there's like product ownership training happening across the state. You're seeing that job title floating around. So that's like a really good example of like changes happening, right? Also, there's a lot of user-centered thinking in general that's happening. The state, like many large enterprises, are just like tripping over themselves talking about things like agile software development. People in general don't understand it and are using it at like, you can weaponize some of these concepts, in stupid ways. That's definitely happening. But there's lots of bright spots. When it comes to doing things like discovery sprints and stuff like that, I think that the state is still very far behind. One of the things we talk a lot about is like instrumenting the product. So a team using Google Analytics and understanding how to use it is like that's like a good example of a positive thing that's happening now, just to give you a sense of the current state. We use tools like Crazy Egg and things like that for some of the stuff we worked on, and that were like blow people's minds, being like, wow, I can see a heat map of user behavior. So like instrumentation needs to get like a lot stronger. One of the things that we worked on early on was this thing called HR Works. It was like a new HR and payroll system for the state. And they leaned into a couple of these concepts, had a vendor come in, like run workshops, that product, they work with like all the agencies are involved. So like that thing is like really like this consensus kind of roadmap building. So, and that was pre-COVID too. So like lots of sticky notes everywhere. The last thing I'll say about that is one of the things that the digital service has brought to the table, going back to UX plus procurement, is when you see like especially greenfield things develop in government, it's there's so many tactics you can use that are like well baked, like creating service blueprints, right? That's something that seems like relatively new to everyone we've interacted in the government. But like once they go through kind of that type of exercise, or like card sorting things, like using tools like Mural, like people really start to latch onto that. And I feel like facilitation in the age of COVID is like really gotten the bump, because you can easily get like, 50 people. I mean, Lilo and Travis experienced this a lot in the COVID work. You can get a bunch of people into a room quickly to do some of these prioritization exercises or like discovery exercises, and get people on the phone for video interviews, like very easy kind of in the world we're living in right now. A lot harder if everyone needs to be there in person or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff is a lot more accessible these days. Like you were saying, Kelly, I mean, like doing virtual card sorts, doing kind of that whiteboarding session over virtual whiteboards, I think has actually worked out really well. Like, truth be told, I was a little worried about doing that kind of stuff in other meetings that I've had, but I mean, they've actually worked out really well. Aside from people moving entire elements of a mural board around, but no big deal there. So with if you had like a CDS kind of like telescope or magic 8-ball or crystal ball, whatever soothsaying tool you want to use, what do you think, or how do you think this is going to evolve like 5 years from now?
Well, the goal is to not have it anymore, right? So like in 5 years from now, you want to see like super strong agency teams with like high level of psychological safety, using like modern software delivery practices. Everything is super dialed in. And then the funding and stuff upstream from the policymakers has changed around to better align with like how you want to deliver digital services to the residents. I have like two other kind of theories of that's like the digital services part, right? Like not the digital service team itself, but like delivering digital services to residents, right? Like that is clearly evolving and going in the right direction on most of these things. So I feel like that's all happening. Then like this next piece, I feel like that is coming after kind of understanding how to deliver digital services correctly across all levels of government is APIs. So, one of our theories is look 10 years ago in the private sector, and that's exactly what's happening in government now. So 10 years ago in the private sector, like mobile first, like everything is super instrumented, like funnels, conversion rates, like all that is like the discussion, right? That's all happening now. The next thing that happened in the private sector 10 years ago is, companies started, every company had APIs. Right? I mean, that was more like 20 years ago, but like 10 years ago really was where like, if you're working with any company, you're likely interacting with APIs. That's now starting in the government, right? So Centers for Medicare and Medicaid this year, they created regulation that mandates all state Medicaid plans build APIs that give Medicaid members access to their claims information. That's huge, because every state we've worked with on this is like, okay, so CMS is telling us to do this. Like, what is an API exactly? And then we'll do it, And a lot of the vendors are like, hey, we can build this for you, but they can build the APIs. States don't have developer.mystate.gov. They don't have developer relations, developer evangelist. They don't understand how to scale they don't understand rate limits, like nothing, right? No states have those teams at all. So that's like this next chapter, right? I think that's going to unfold for a lot of states, and that'll like intersect with a lot of our work here, all of us on this call. And then the next chapter, I think after that, if you kind of follow that 10-year, behind cycle, is going to be like the ML stuff, and not chatbots, but like predictive analytics and fraud detection, things like that as features in the product. So when you take like a child welfare product from the state, right? Today, it's like a digital service, right? How can this product work well for the case managers and the counties using it, right? All right, that's happening, right? And it's like they're using modern software delivery practices and so on. The next but there's counties that are like pulling data and doing things themselves, right? People are innovating in all these different counties. So the next step is like, all right, that should have some proper APIs. So like as counties want to build upon, like they're doing it in the real way, not data dumps or hacky ways, right? So that will come. And then after that, it's like, okay, well, we want to bake in some fraud detection and like some robotic process automation and whatever these terms are, right? To do certain things. Like, I think that that's like the 10-year roadmap for government, you know, and like cross-reference that with like talent and funding and some of these other concepts we've talked about. That's how the mix needs to come together. Because like the teams are going to need to be more and more sophisticated. Like if a team can't deliver a freaking web app, how are they going to wrestle with like building out ML pipelines, right? Or handling, you know, a developer experience, right? These things, it's just going to get harder for teams. So anyway, that's kind of how I see things like unfolding in this next phase here.
Building on that, is there an effort from the CDS and your teams to document these kinds of innovative efforts along the way? And is there a place where community members here, where we can grab links and share some, you know, template documents, policies, even just a frame of reference kind of stuff?
Yeah, so writing about the work, that's like so important, right? And I feel like that's part of this civic tech movement is like, there's a new book by Hannah that just came out, like Sid Harrell's book, like this idea of like government innovation and like, what does it take to like deliver better? And all of the, you know, how to build diverse teams and like represent everybody in the community and like all that stuff. I feel like that's really coming together as far as like grab a reference book. And, you know, but so like we just had a new UX designer and a new engineer on board onto the team. And like that was their required reading, was stuff like that to get up and running. We've been trying to write more about the work. That case study is a good example. Like we blog sometimes and are kind of active on Twitter and stuff. But I think that the real place is 18F and the Beck Center. Like those are the two places I feel like where they're writing the most about the work, especially 18F. There is a ton of stuff there that we lean on. And I feel like as, you know, when you're talking to someone, of course, like when you show them like, hey, read this, like things just seem more formal. I have a quick thing.
I'd love that required reading list.
And I have a quick link to share here in the chat. So this is like not exactly writing about the work, but it's this interesting thing that we've been working on where it's this like modern software delivery matrix, like a maturity model type of thing. So we use this a bunch when we talk to teams, and even teams like agencies where we're super engaged. It's like, hey, like how are we feeling kind of these different categories? Like with DevSecOps, like are we able to ship a text change to a web page without involving like, you know, a conference call on a Sunday? Do we trust each other? Like, are we doing like any sort of user research? Like, it's a cool, so like it's like writing or reading about the work, like Sid Harrell's book is super important. But then like the frameworks and stuff I'm really into also. It's like, how can you grab this thing, like the mural templates or something? Like, how can you grab something off the shelf and just apply it like that afternoon for whatever you're working on? I think it's going to be super helpful too. So yeah, we're trying to write as much as we can about the work. That's definitely something we're focused on.
That is awesome. I know we learned so much from what Carrie and Wyoming were doing in terms of even simple things like how to do funding around cloud platform solutions. You know, pay as you go just didn't work in government, specifically working with the departments, and coming up with kind of t-shirt sizes, small, medium, and large, and being able to project and actually have a document that walked us through how to do the true up with the department was a huge step forward. So yeah, anything along those lines that could help would be great.
My buddy, this guy, Matt Lira, that ran the Office of American Innovation for the last couple of years in the White House, he's very helpful to the U.S. Digital Service, and he's from Colorado. And so when I was in D.C., like we would always talk about stuff, and it was funny because he missed Colorado so much, you know. But he's a D.C. lifer now, you know. But like, But anyway, we were talking to him a couple weeks ago, and we have guest speakers join our staff meetings and stuff. And he said, there's no IP in government. And that's one of the things he loves so much about it, because the states can collaborate in the way like county, city, state, like federal, like we can all collaborate together because, and that's so awesome about this. And I was telling him that I was using that line left and right. And he was like, yeah, actually I got that from Hickenlooper. And I thought that was so cool, to kind of bring it full circle. But yeah, that's, the communities like this, open sourcing your work, like there's lots of forums for sharing stuff. The Code for America Summit is coming up. Like there is so many amazing ways. And that's one of the things I love so much about being like in civic tech now is it is like this massive community. And that's just not talking to each other. It's like you throw in like US Digital Response and other things like that. And there's like actually doers that will be like, hey, I can help. Like point me to invite me to that private GitHub repo and I can contribute to that. And so that stuff's happening.
I think you're right. It's emerging from that shell where we had all focused just on open data, and now shifting into something where we're actually making that actionable. So super exciting. With that, my three takeaways were definitely to talk about the emergency funding and looking at how we restructure that. I think it's a really it's a challenging environment for government to look 14, 16, 18 months down the road and secure that funding. You've given us some thought there. I think also you mentioned on the user experience. I mean, that was my first real introduction in working with you was from a county working in that initial COVID response. And you were asking questions from a county perspective. How are we going to use the tool? How are we using the data? That was unprecedented. Nobody from the state had really engaged the counties in that kind of way. And I love that, more of that. And I think also the looking at engaging the legislature and policy decision makers in what software development and decisions are like, getting them more familiar and allowing for that more flexible environment. And I'll throw it to Lilo for just a couple of comments, but then I want to open it up for anybody. I know there's been a lot of comments in the chat, but I want to throw it open for others to ask questions.
Yeah. So yeah, I won't take up a ton of time because chat has been blowing up. So definitely want to focus in on everyone else too. So my three things, I'll just rapid fire through them. Catching talent. I think that's kind of a huge thing at the state. Like we don't do it quite right. We try to attract talent, but we don't actually catch the talent as it is flowing our way. UX and procurement being secret BFFs. I think that secret needs to be more out there, and I think you've done a really great job of exposing that. I mean, I can tell you right now, like from the stuff that we've bought in the past, like UX has been the absolute last thing that has been taken into consideration. CA ticketing system, not to throw shade. And then the last thing is government has no IP. I think that's such a profound statement because it's one of those things, and I think that's one of the biggest undercurrents for this community is the fact that we all share in the exact same struggles, the same concerns, issues. We all deal with constituents. And so if we can help each other be better as a government to help those same people, like I think that's like the biggest key for this community and for everything that I've taken away from this conversation so far. So amazing stuff. Let's turn it over to questions from the audience and addressing anything in chat that we might have missed because chat was on fire.
I did want to come back to Dan's original question, and we touched on it with the digital services, but specifically from the contact tracing, what lessons did you have from a technical perspective working in government and addressing things like anonymity, being able to handle some of the security issues around that?
Well, for contact tracing, the construction of the team is the vendor, which is this company, Demaji, OIT, and CDPHE. So CDPHE is where like the product owner is, and one or two other, and a couple of other like subject matter experts, epidemiologists and so on, that are awesome at this stuff and have like dedicated their lives to it. And then the OIT team is like, where the tech lead, if you will, is. And so the way that the way it's stitched together is, the public health infrastructure in the state has a couple of systems like electronic lab results, disease reporting system, and APIs are connecting these systems together. And in some cases, it's like these FTP drops, right? And files moving around. So the security stuff was pretty straightforward. The tech lead is like, here's the architecture we have in public health. Like, here's how we do APIs, when we go direct to, with vendors. And this is important to separate the API stuff I was talking about before is like publicly facing, where like third-party developers can like self-service and get access to stuff. This is different, where it's, you're very much in control of the exchange of data with the vendor, and everything's very locked down. Spun up sandbox, we have sandbox environments for all the public health stuff. So spun that stuff up and connected things together. OIT has like security governance and stuff like that. And like folks that, they work on a bunch of different things. So they come in and like ask you a bunch of questions and do deep dives. Everything, like there's monitoring on everything and so on. So I would say it's like, enterprise app 101. It's like it's like web apps and databases stitched together with like basic APIs, like nothing fancy. The interesting thing about the public health infrastructure has been the load. So when you have like a database that's your like disease reporting system, and it gets a couple of hundred records a day written from the state labs, and then that goes to 30,000 or whatever. It's just like all the other systems with COVID. Like you watch the unemployment insurance system break because the file's too big to send to Wells Fargo. Like it's that type of stuff where like, it's kind of the unprecedented thing. And like all that, I think in general in the world, we're seeing like a public health data or infrastructure upgrade. It's like a fascinating kind of macro trend. Like every level of government is like, our stuff broke in half. So what's the game plan? And hopefully some of these like ARP funds and so on will go to like lots of investment in that stuff. So it really does modernize it. The exchange is a lot better. So like the different layers of government that need the right information will be getting it. Like I think that all that stuff unfolds over the next couple of years.
Cool. I think Travis, you had a question?
Yeah, it's actually super weedy. I was about to just send it in the chat. Question, Kelly, because I would actually love the documentation. It's a challenge that the SEs keep running into. And I remember obviously doing what we did with the Magi and everything. Documentation around procurement for tools, agile procurement, without running afoul of procurement rules, statutes, laws, etc. Do you guys have that documented, and is that something that you can share?
We don't. 18F is definitely like the spot that they've published a bunch of guides and stuff. The COVID stuff's interesting because you have these emergency procurement rules. So right. This kind of goes back to the first thing we were all talking about of like a digital service team. And like, so when Matthew and I got this thing started, the first hire on the team wasn't like an amazing engineer from Google that we got to leave and come work at the state. Like it was our procurement lead. Because these teams don't work unless you really understand like how to navigate government. And that means procurement by far number one. There's like lots of great tweets about this stuff where, it's like a new technologist into government year one, like what's procurement? Like year two, like procurement is everything, it's like such a great lesson in that. But so there's emergency procurement rules, which we didn't lean really on them. For this, we were able to kind of go through like things like the bake off and those strategies, as you can read in that Beck Center case study, are like all teams can be using those things. The other interesting thing that is happening, Brandon kind of talked about how do you work with smaller teams, and like how can more and more people get involved, and this idea of vendor pools, like that is also so key. Like that stuff's happening in interesting ways all over the civic tech ecosystem. Having this collection of companies, like at CMS, for example, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid they have a vendor pool, and in order to get into the vendor pool, like you as the vendor have to show that you build a certain way, like you use these agile principles, like you use these human-centered design techniques, right? And once you get into the pool, then you're part of like a group of like 10 or 20 companies that when there's work at CMS, they can turn to this pool of people that work the way that CMS wants to work, right? So states need that same type of thing, and all those things are in motion.
I think, Kate, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. Well, actually, two things. First of all, I want to make sure Kelly, thank you. This is incredible. I'm just personally so inspired. And I want to keep this conversation going as long as you're able. So I know that we're getting close to the top of the hour, but if you're able to go a little bit over, I would hate to cut this short because it's just fantastic. But I did have a question as well. I'm just curious to see if what you're doing is happening or where it's happening, where else it's happening outside of 18F. And I guess, if I can hog the mic enough to say, what are the challenges to others setting something like this up?
Yeah, so we talk all the time to people that are like US Digital Service alumni or people like that have come back from DC to their home state and they're like, hey, I want to start a digital service. Like, what do I do? So there's been, like 10 different times I've gotten like the same group of Google Docs together and shipped it off to them, Virginia, Michigan, Kansas, like states like that. We're super close with New Jersey has an awesome team. It's a bunch of US Digital Service alumni that are there. California, Rick Clow, the famous Googler, Google Ventures, is now like the CTO in California. Lots of awesome stuff happening there. So Massachusetts has had a digital service for a number of years, and Georgia, the digital service concept takes on kind of different meaning depending on what context. So like in Georgia, for example, it's like if OIT renamed itself the digital service, right? Like it's like a branding thing, but in Colorado, it's like totally different where we're like term limited and it's like a whole different thing. So like that phrase is kind of being used in weird ways. The ecosystem is like 18F being able to work with states, US Digital Service being able to work with states. Like we had, I mentioned that exposure notifications meeting with US Digital Service has done software engineering for the state of Colorado. Like now it's been in a volunteer capacity, but that stuff, that is changing. Like, I don't know if you saw like the tech modernization fund at the federal level, it's like 40 or 50 million bucks for the US Digital Service. They're gonna be hiring hundreds of people over the next couple of years. Like this idea of federal being different than state, being different than county, that's one of the lessons that Brandon taught me in the whole like COVID experience is I didn't really understand anything about county government, coming from federal to state. And now I understand it as like this full continuum where everyone needs to interoperate together. That's super key, whether it's around UX stuff or data sharing or whatever. So like, there's a bunch of things that are happening all around the ecosystem, I think, and it's like these seeds everywhere of interesting things happening. And I think that all of it though, like normalizes to like the concepts we all know, like the money has to be right. The teams have to be strong and empowered, like users have to be front and center. Everything has to be instrumented.
Well, I know we're coming up against the time. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us and kind of sharing your experience and so many lessons. And to the members of the community, I think, this was our first live gig attempt. And we've had several shows put together on Intentionally Left Blank. We'd be really curious about your input regarding, the length, the focuses. We would like to do a lot more of these live gigs, but we don't want to eat up too much of your time. So we're trying to balance asynchronous learning as well as opportunities on live gigs. So please, I'll make a post in the digital transformation community. Please let us know what you're thinking. We're rookies at this and trying to find our way. So.
Yeah, and I'll pile onto that real quick too and just say, we're gonna cut this up and post this recording out on the Intentionally Left Blank YouTube page, and we'll probably throw some of the links that Kelly provided out there too, so that you can refer back to them in case you didn't do like I did and just open up like 20 different tabs to capture all this stuff for later. So you can go back to that, and we'll post that back in the community as well.
Well, thank you, everyone. This has been, seriously, Kelly, a call to action. Again, personally for me, but I think for a lot of folks, really inspiring, so informative, such amazing perspective. Brandon, Lilo, thank you guys for bringing Kelly to this broader community so we can actually discuss this. And I truly do hope that you and others in this community maybe make this a monthly occurrence in terms of like talking about digital transformation, civic innovation. I think this community is perfectly set up for that. So well done. Thank you guys. Have a great Friday.
Thanks all. Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate it, man.